The beginning of the story for me is in Florida in the 1950s. My family moved down from Boston. We moved to a place called Ponte Vedra, which has become, in recent years, quite a mecca for tennis. Was not a mecca for tennis in those days, but is now. And the reality is that with that as an opportunity and the nice weather that we were enjoying in Ponte Vedra, my brother and I have a younger brother, started playing tennis. I was 10, he was 7. Tennis in those days was largely being played year-round, only in warm weather places, because there weren't any indoor tennis courts to speak of. So if you were living in California or Texas or Florida, you were more likely to emerge as a significant junior player in those days, because the boys and girls who lived in other colder climates really couldn't play year-round. So a lot of the better ranked junior players were from those warm states, those sunnier states, including Florida. Anyway, we took it up at 10 and 7, and both of us became pretty proficient. My brother, because he started younger and had the edge of, being only 7, 8 when he started, became really quite good. I became good enough to be ranked in Florida, et cetera. And then we decided my family decided that we should go back up north to boarding school from an academic standpoint. So both of us ended up at Andover outside Boston, where we played tennis. Both captained the team at Andover. And that was sort of the end of either of us having a chance to be really emerging junior stars, because we were now back in one of those colder climates where there really wasn't any indoor tennis. So tennis was only a fall and spring sport in Massachusetts. It was not a year-round sport. And other people who continued to stay in those warmer climates were the ones who emerged. For example, my brother had, over time, a 3-0 record against Jimmy Connors as a junior. Well, Jimmy Connors became quite a good player. Anyway, from Andover, we both went to college at Harvard, and we both played tennis at Harvard. Anyway, so my story is junior tennis in Florida, 4 years of Andover, including captaining the tennis team, 4 years at Harvard, where I played on the team. I did not captain the team, but I played on the team. And from there, tennis just became central to virtually everything I did. I mean, one of those realities in those days was that those of us who were able to do so taught tennis in the summer times, because it was a way to make a little money and continue to hit the ball and be on the courts. And so it would be not uncommon, and in my case, it was exactly the pattern, that you would go from the academic year into some sort of summer teaching job. Now, we get to the part where I meet David Benjamin. In 1965, when I graduated from Andover, I was in Europe. I was in France playing tennis tournaments with an Andover classmate, and we were at the Nice Lawn Tennis Club, and that's where David and I first met. So I've known David since July of 1965. He was going to be the captain of the Harvard team in the following year, and I was going to be a freshman. So that's how we met. I introduced myself. We became friends, and we've been friends since. I think the important thing to understand about my generation is what I just mentioned, and that is that tennis was the key, not just to being able to be on a team in school and have all of those experiences, but it was also the key to good summertime employment, which led you to interesting places and interesting people. And I certainly would be a great example of how that has opened a lot of doors for me over the course of many years. David, as a friend and as a buddy on the tennis court, was somebody that I kept in touch with from that day forward. And we spent time in Cambridge together. He went on to Princeton, as you may know, where he ended up on the faculty and also started off as the tennis and squash coach at Princeton in the early years of his Princeton tenure. We kept in touch, and at a point in the early 80s, after I had been doing various projects in the 70s, which I'll tell you about in a second, including teaching tennis in various places, I ended up moving to Princeton. And at that point, David had basically started to really nurture the ITA. So my beginning with the ITA goes to early 80s in Princeton when I was living there and David was there, and he had started really spending some of his time on the ITA. Back up for a moment, in the 70s, one of the things that David shared with me after he had done a stint overseas coaching in Africa was how rewarding that was for him. And he encouraged me to consider stepping into that job after he had sort of started it because he could only do it for 1 year, one multi-week tour in Africa. And so I did. I went to Africa in 1975 to coach coaches on behalf of both the USTA and a division of the U.S. government, which was funding this. And I went back a number of times after that. So David went once. He encouraged me to go once, and I went back a dozen times to coach coaches all over the world, really, but particularly in Africa. And again, attribute a lot of that experience to the college tennis background that I had and the ability that I had as a college tennis player to understand how to play and understand how to coach. My first coaching experience was actually with Jack Barnaby, who was a legendary Harvard tennis coach before Dave Fish. And in the summer of 1966, after my freshman year in college, Jack invited me to teach with him, for him, at his summertime location in Duxbury, Massachusetts. And I learned at the sort of knees of, the feet of one of the greats in terms of how to coach in that environment, in that sort of environment. And then the following summer, ironically, 1967, I worked with David at one of his summertime coaching jobs. So you can see there's a lot of connectivity between me and Dave Benjamin, between me and junior tennis, followed by college tennis, followed by coaching tennis, followed by the coaching of coaches. Over the course of the 70s, when I was doing all this travel to Africa and other places to coach coaches, I became the first chief coach for the International Tennis Federation. It was a position created for me to sort of give me a title that I could sort of use to open doors in a lot of these places where we were doing the development work. And interestingly enough, because it's perhaps relevant to your overall understanding of where tennis is today, one of the things that we were trying to accomplish during the 1970s, while I was doing this work overseas on behalf of the ITF, because the ITF took over the sponsorship of that whole series of missions. One of the things that I was doing with a man called Philippe Chartrier, whose name is now better known as the Chartrier Stadium, which is the main stadium at Roland Garros. Philippe and I worked together on a plan to get tennis back into the Olympics, which we finally did. He finally did accomplish in 1988. It had not been an Olympic sport for years, and he wanted to get it back into the Olympics, and the path for that, in his mind, was going to be to get enough third world countries involved in believing they could have tennis players at the Olympics so that they would vote for the Olympics. And when it came time to choose which sport, they would vote for tennis, and they did. So let's see. The reality there is that I'm connecting for you some dots. Junior tennis leads to college tennis leads to coaching, potentially, and in many cases it did because it was a good path to summertime income. Coaching of players leads potentially to the coaching of coaches, which is one of the things I did. It leads potentially to being involved in the politics of tennis, which certainly is reflected in the story about the Olympics. And it also takes you down a path where you are inevitably going to be talking to some of the people who are commercially involved in tennis. So now we move to the early 80s. Again, I'm doing other things. I've been to law school. I graduated past the bar. I was considering some opportunities to practice corporate law. But I was still keeping my ear out for interesting tennis opportunities. And again, here's David. David called me from Princeton in the early 80s and said, hey, you're in Boston. You should come down to New York because I've arranged for you, if you're interested, to interview with Head Tennis. They're looking for somebody that I think they're looking to fill a position. I think you'd be a perfect fit. I've recommended to meet with you. It's pretty urgent. Come on down. So I did. I met with the chairman and others at Head Tennis and took a position that I started in 1982, which was based in Princeton. And that position was to be in charge in the beginning of player promotions for Head. And eventually, as I spent 5 or 6 years at Head, ended up being international sales as well as player promotions. What was player promotions in those days? Well, again, I don't know your background, so I don't know how conversant you are with some of these people that I'm going to mention, but the head of the Head Advisory Board, when I took on that job in 1982, was Arthur Ashe. He had been associated with Head for a long time. He was a retired player at that point, but he was still active and obviously very well known. And he and I worked together to sort of build what he had a vision of, which was an enhanced advisory board. And one of the suggestions that he made to me was that we should move the whole concept of recruiting advisory board people away from the traditional approach to just go to pro players. And he said, let's get some people who are associated with the game, who are making differences in the game, and let's give them a platform on behalf of Head, make them Head ambassadors. So we recruited Jim Lair and Jack Groppel. I don't know if you know those names. At a time when both Jim and Jack were really very early in their careers. Jim was a sports psychologist. Jack was a biomechanist. They were just getting started. Now, if you do some research and you don't know this story, I can tell you that when you research Lair and Groppel, you'll discover that that launchpad was pretty helpful to them because they went on to form a very successful business, which still exists, which they launched in the beginning in a remote location that nobody had ever heard of called Lake Nona, Florida. And at Lake Nona, Florida, they started something called LGE, which morphed into a variety of other things, and then they eventually sold it to Johnson & Johnson. Jim obviously started as a tennis sports psychologist, tennis-focused sports psychologist, and went on to a very, very big, broad reach into other sports. Jack likewise. And Arthur was able to see that coming for them and to associate us with it from the beginning. Through the 80s, then I'm at Head, and I'm continuing to play tennis, and I'm continuing to obviously see David all the time because he's right down the road. And I became more and more aware of what was happening with the ITA. And on behalf of Head, I started to attend the regular ITA gatherings, the conventions, which was the tradition for many years. And I've been going off and on to the ITA convention since the 80s. So that's, again, a fairly long experience of watching the ITA evolve as a organization, grow from what it was to what it is. It is very different today than it was in the 80s, in the 90s. Much better organized, much broader reach, much more professional. Thanks to David, and then over the last decade, thanks to Tim Russell and John Bogosian and others, it's become quite a well-organized, efficient machine representing college tennis in a very effective way, both with the coaches who are members and also with a much broader community. And at the same time, I think all of us have watched as a number of college tennis players have done very well after playing college tennis. You certainly have that phenomenon in Plainview now with some of the younger players on the tour who are doing very well who have college backgrounds, both on the men's side and the women's side. So college tennis is no longer just college tennis. It's definitely a very well-organized entry point for young players who want to take their junior tennis careers, deploy them on the courts at universities around the country, and then eventually have a path either to do more tennis, to coach tennis, to play professional tennis, or to work in various other ways where your tennis connections turn out to be very valuable to you. In no particular order, I'll mention that my own experience with the ITA has included jumping in from time to time on specific projects. I don't know if Tim or David have mentioned Tennis for America to you, but Tennis for America was something that Tim Russell and I together thought about, found a way to get going, found a way to launch. I was involved in some fundraising to get Tennis for America off the ground. It is a great idea and was a great program. Unfortunately, it's no longer part of the equation for the ITA, but that idea is a good one and will continue to be nurtured in some way, either by the ITA or by other independent organizations who sort of look at the Tennis for America story and decide, okay, that's pretty interesting. Let's try to find a way to let these young men and women who are emerging from college tennis and don't want to try to play professional tennis and don't want to immediately take another job, but would like to use their tennis to do good and at the same time make contacts, build a network. Why not set up something like Tennis for America and create that as an opportunity for those young men and women? I think somebody will do that. I thought about doing that myself. So here we are in 2025. I guess my reality for this is that I think it's a really important mission that you and David and Tim, and presumably others, are considering here, because you're going to hear a lot of stories from different people as you conduct these interviews, and a lot of them are going to intersect, because I think I will not be the only person who will either say this or seem to be saying this. Tennis is a very small world in many ways. There are many connecting dots. There are not 6 degrees of separation. There's usually 2 or 3 degrees of separation. You tell me somebody in the tennis world now, and I either know that person, or I know somebody who knows that person, or I know somebody who knows somebody who knows that person. It is not a huge universe. And that makes it kind of fun. And it is confusing for the outsiders, because there's so many organizations, there's so many alphabet names you can't keep straight. What is the ITA? What is the ITF? What is the USDA? What the heck is UTR? Etc. But a lot of these people are a little bit like the wonderful ending of the movie Casablanca, where the policeman says to Humphrey Bogart, "Let's round up the usual suspects." The usual suspects are everywhere in this business, and it's amusing to me to keep coming across them. First of all, I'm very loyal to David, and anything I can do to help David along the way, I've always wanted to try to do. That was an original driver. Another reason, I guess, for me would be that I do believe, as I think you're going to find that a lot of people you're talking to will also say they understand and believe, that tennis has opened a ton of doors for me. I know it has. And I continue to see that in my life. I continue to witness that in friends' lives who had college tennis or tennis backgrounds. And I believe the ITA is playing a really important role, has always played a really important role, and currently is playing that same very important role in providing a platform for connecting the various players and coaches and sponsors and interested parties who all see college tennis the way we do, as a really interesting subset of the world of competitive tennis, combining academics, of course, with sports. Another part of my story that may be relevant as you're piecing together where is the ITA now and what's happening now that is different from what was happening 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. One of the things that I can talk about from a very firsthand experience is how a lot of the video technology that's now pretty common in the college tennis world came to be where it is. So in 2014, when I was in between different kinds of law-related consulting jobs, I got a call from Dave Fish, whose name I'm sure you either know or will know, who at that time was finishing almost 50 years of being the Harvard tennis coach. He and I were contemporaries at Harvard. He was actually my brother Rick's class at Harvard. So he was in the class of 72. I was in class of 69, but I knew Dave even in those early 70s days. And Dave Fish called me in 2014 after the NCAAs, and he said, "Steve, I've just come back from the NCAAs, which at that point were being held in Athens, Georgia. And I ran into this group from Israel, and they've got this technology, and they showed it to me, and it does these amazing things analytically and cameras, and it's pretty cool, but I don't really understand it. I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be easy for them to get me to understand it, but maybe you would understand it. In any event, they're looking for somebody to help them assess the possibilities for that product in this country, in this tennis environment." So anyway, I got involved with PlaySite in the very early days of PlaySite. And one of the first calls I made was to David Benjamin. The initial, you're going to keep hearing the intersection with David, the initial offices of PlaySite were in New Jersey, about an hour north of Princeton, where David lives and has lived for years. I called David and I said, "I'm coming to the East Coast, just spur of the moment to meet these guys from Israel. And, kind of stay with you and Martine, and we can catch up. And at the same time, I'll just use your place as a hotel, if you will, and I'll drive up and talk to these guys, and then I'll come back and tell you what I heard." So I stayed with David and Martine. I drove up and had the meeting with the founders of PlaySite, and came back and said to David, I'm going to be like Fish, and probably you as well. I'm not sure I understand all the ins and outs of what they're trying to do, but it is a compelling story, and it might be the right time for college tennis. What do you think? And so Dave and I started talking about video technology, who in the college tennis world would want it, what would they do with it. And over the course of the first year, we decided to form a sponsorship relationship between PlaySide and the ITA. So that was one of the first sponsorship deals that Tim Russell signed, because at that point, David was stepping aside and Tim was stepping in. And it was a successful partnership for many years. And one of the things that happened was we realized that although some of the analytics were going to be have less broad interest than the live streaming, we decided live streaming would really be pretty important, and therefore PlaySide had a role to play in equipping a lot of these tennis stadiums with the right live streaming option. The NCAAs are going on right now in Baylor. The men's teams are playing. I'm pretty sure that's being live streamed via PlaySide, because we put cameras on a lot of different stadium courts, including the ones in Baylor. So I saw that evolution. I continue to see that evolution as various technologies are coming into tennis in general and college tennis in particular. I'm currently working for another company like PlaySite. I stepped away from PlaySite when they stepped away from tennis, but or they largely stepped away from tennis. But I'm now working for a German company, also doing the same sorts of things. Interestingly enough, 2025. If you ask me what I'm thinking about all day long, it's pickleball more than tennis. So that's a different story. But pickleball is exploding. We have the Wingfield company that I'm working with has a terrific pickleball product. And that takes me into a world where I'm seeing the overlap between pickleball and tennis very clearly. We have a meeting in 2 weeks in Las Vegas with some folks who are working closely with Andre Agassi, and Andre and Steffi are now in pickleball up to their eyeballs. So it's really interesting to me. I was in, just a little aside, I was in Naples, Florida 2 or 3 weeks ago, and had an opportunity while I was there to go over to the very large pickleball facility in East Naples, which many people say is the largest public pickleball facility in the world. It's 100 courts, and it's a venue for a very big tournament that took place at the end of April. I was talking to a very good friend of mine who's been around the tennis industry for a long time, that I've known also since the 70s, a woman named Mary Carrillo, and we were talking about pickleball, and I said, are you going to go over and watch the pickleball? And she said, I am, because I have a really good friend from my days on the tour who is a very accomplished women's doubles player, and won some Grand Slam titles, Joanne Russell, and she's going to play in a pickleball tournament. And she's playing with this guy you might have heard of called Ivan Lendl. I said, that's very interesting. So Lendl's playing pickleball. And then, of course, Andre went down and played in that tournament with the leading female pickleball player. But anyway, so the overlap between pickleball and tennis is a story that I'm following very closely. And that, by the way, and this is not really for the moment your topic or even something you're going to hear from too many other people, but I'm pretty convinced that if we flash forward another 4 or 5 years, the ITA is in some way going to be in pickleball. That's my guess, because it's going to be irresistible to sort of think about the ways that pickleball will emerge almost inevitably as a college sport, an organized college sport. It's already a very, very significantly organized club sport at many colleges, but it'll become an official NCAA sport. If any of the Olympic sports are continued to be played, it'll be an Olympic sport, and it'll be played at colleges, and then some organization will want to do something like what the ITA has done so successfully for college tennis. The couple of obvious things. One of the realities of the ITA as you study it is that the membership includes obviously the best known programs and the best known coaches, but it also includes lots and lots and lots of less well-known programs and less well-known coaches at all the different divisions. You have your D1 teams that are focused on and televised and talked about, who produce most of the tour players that are out there playing, whether it's Shelton or Peyton Stearns currently, or Daniel Collins, or any of the other people who are currently doing great work as professional players. Most of those are coming out of D1 programs. The interesting question for the future of college tennis is going to be not just what happens now that you have all of this NIL conflict and the potential for the world of college tennis to be changing very significantly at the highest levels due to the way in which players are now moving around and in many cases being compensated while they're still playing, etc. And whether or not tennis can survive that, whether or not organized college tennis can actually survive what's happening, and not end up being on the chopping block as schools are obliged to come up with large amounts of money for the televised sports like basketball and football, and end up not feeling they can fund tennis programs. I would say college tennis is in jeopardy to a certain degree. I'm sure you'll hear that from different people. You may or may not hear it as overtly as I'm saying it. It may not be something you want to put into this documentary or this series of interviews, but I would say you're at a very delicate moment in college tennis on the one hand. On the other hand, you couldn't be at a better moment because it's very clear now, whereas 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and certainly 20 years ago, many informed people would say, well, if you want to be a really successful world-renowned tennis player, you don't go to college. You go straight onto the tour because you don't want to waste those 2, 3, 4 years not playing at the top level when you're at your best athletic level. You want to get out and play. That used to be what people said and thought. Now I think it's very clear that a lot of people are thinking otherwise. They're thinking, well, actually, if you go and play on a college team, and you have the team experience, and you understand how to compete in those sorts of environments, and you get the fun of playing with your contemporaries in a team environment and coached by a really successful or really motivated coach, and by the way, you're also getting an academic credential, you're making a smart move. You're not making a dumb move. So I think tennis is now generally received as something that you absolutely don't need to turn pro right away to do. You can do what a player like Ben did, where you do really well, and then you go onto the tour. You drop out of college and go onto the tour. You can do something like what Danielle did, and you can finish your program and go on the tour and do very well. Yeah, that's a great question. We started off when we moved to Florida swimming, right? And I continued to swim competitively. Even when I got to Andover, I was on the swim team, but it was boring. And, and again, I don't have anything against swimmers, but it's a fairly monotonous, very isolating activity, especially at a competitive level. You spend a lot of time training for a very brief competitive moment. That's about the best you can say for it. There's a lot of sitting around, and then you're in the pool, and when you're out of the pool, sitting around again. Tennis has a lot of advantages over sports like swimming. The other thing we could have taken up, and I will smile as I say this, because maybe we should have taken it up, is golf, because golf was right there too. At my age, and you can figure out from some of the dates in my stories that I'm not young, the reality is that neither of us, I have a sister also who's a very good tennis player. And actually, that sister, again, talk about intersecting with David Benjamin. My sister Jan, who's 12 years younger than I am, played very successful college tennis in Florida, became the number one ranked woman in Florida when she was still a teenager. Went to Princeton, played for 1 year on the Princeton team for forgetting whether if I'm right about who was coaching her. But anyway, she played for 1 year, was part of a Princeton team that won the Ivy League title that year, and then she quit. And she quit basically saying, I can't do both. I don't want to do both. Anyway, she's gone on to have a very successful career in a variety of different ways, continues to hit the ball. All three of us could have played golf, and none of us did. So no, I don't play at all. And it's too bad because it's a great sport for people my age. But tennis was great and opened a lot of doors. And, my story will be unique to a certain degree because not only was college tennis the pathway for me to good summertime employment opportunities, good networking opportunities. I met my first wife teaching tennis. I met my second wife, the mother of my children, teaching tennis. I mean, there were a lot of different ways that tennis has intersected with my life. I'd say from the beginning, it just appealed to me much more than any team sport. I had no opportunity in that school environment where we were in Florida to play any organized team sports. The schools were tiny. There wasn't a football team. There wasn't. So it was going to be something we did after school. It was not going to be a school sport. And then by the time we had so much success, I mean, we were pretty heady with our successes. My brother was number 3 in the country. He was a national champion in various junior events. I had some successes. Tennis quickly sort of roped us in. Is my answer. It was fun. We were good. It was opening doors, and I never looked back. But I should have learned golf. That was a mistake. That's always a good question to get people to try to answer. I'm going to give you some of the cliched answers because they're true. The reason they're cliche, and cliches are cliches because people view them as potentially correct and sometimes wise. Tennis is an individual sport for the most part. Yes, you have a partner if you're playing doubles, but for the most part, it's you. Yes, there's now live coaching if you're watching college tennis. Certainly there's some interactions between the coaches and the players during the match. Professional tennis is now including some opportunities for coaching during the match. But essentially, you're on your own. You're trying to figure it out. And if you're good at problem solving, it's a fun activity to do because that's what you have to do from start to finish. You have a plan. You have to change the plan if it's not working. You have to adjust and you have to be resilient. And so from that standpoint, I think intellectually it prepares you for all the other things in life which require the same skills. You have to think on your feet. You have to have a plan and then change your plan if the plan isn't working. All those things that you have to do as a tennis player turn out to be great skills to learn for other things. The other thing I'll say about tennis, which I think perhaps other people won't say, because maybe it's not quite as obvious, is that I learned this. I remember hearing this for the first time from one of the pro players I was working with when I was ahead in the 80s. And that was a young woman who had reached the top levels of the pro tour, but was playing at the same time as Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova, and she couldn't beat them. So she couldn't get into the top 3 because they were in the way. And I was saying to her after she'd lost to Chrissy one more time in the semifinals of some tournament, wow, that must really sting. And she said, what exactly do you mean? And I said, well, losing. She said, well, think about it this way. Everybody in a tennis tournament loses every week except one person. You're losing all the time. If you can't pivot and bounce back from losing, it's the wrong job. And I think one of the things that tennis teaches young players, whether they're junior players or college tennis or aspiring pros, or they're working with those players, is to take losing in stride. And again, that is a tremendous advantage in life. I'll leave you with one analogy, if you will. My son works in the financial industry. He's very high up and representing a very well-known person in the United States who's in the financial industry. And he manages a lot of money. They all manage a lot of money at that level. He will tell you, and anybody in that business will tell you, if you're right 51% of the time, you are a hero. Which means that 49%, 48% of your things you're sure about are wrong. If you can't go to bed at night okay with the fact that today you did a bad thing, by definition of losing, and wake up the next morning and think, okay, today I'll win, you're in the wrong business. And I would say to you, across the board, any sport you learn to play, which confronts you with such regular opportunity to bounce back from not winning and to redefine what it means to win, is a good thing to learn for your life. One last analogy I'll give you from names you've heard of. Jimmy Connors was a terrific competitor. We knew him as a junior. My brother played him a number of times and beat him a number of times. And I remember, and I knew him as a pro player. I remember watching one of his press conferences after he'd lost a match. Some journalist wandered into it and said, wow, gosh, Jimmy, that was a tough match to lose. And Jimmy said, I didn't lose that match. And there was a pause. He said, now, at the end, when they called it, the score wasn't in my favor, but I was winning that match. So in my mind, I won that match. What's your next question? It's like, okay, so you quickly went from the scoreboard says you lost to you were playing really well, you would have won it, and now you're on to the next. You're not even absorbing the loss because you're redefining the thing as a win. Perfect. And that's a great skill to use in life. You're in a meeting and you say something that doesn't go across the right way, and everybody sort of laughs at you or frowns at you. Your boss grunts as if to say, "What the hell? How stupid are you?" On to the next. That's a great skill set. So if tennis can be part of how you learn that as a young person, bravo tennis, because you're going to need that skill set to get through the day in anything you're doing. And if you're in a highly competitive environment, whether it's investing money or making decisions for world peace or whatever it is, you're not going to be right all the time. And if that bothers you endlessly and derails you and leaves you feeling helpless and depressed, you needed to play some tennis, because tennis is certainly going to give you a great opportunity to go, didn't get that one. When do we start tomorrow? Anyway, so yeah, I think tennis is great for a lot of different reasons. And college tennis was part of that. You're in an environment where a lot of other people that are around you are playing other sports, right? And in many cases, they're playing team sports. And one of the things that you can do as a team sport player is blame the other people on the team. So you can have a different kind of response to a score that wasn't in favor of your team. When you're a tennis player, it was you. That's so if you won, it was you. If you didn't win, it was you. Yeah. And you got to be able to deal with both of those things with equanimity. And that's again the cliche about winning and losing that hangs over the wall in Rudyard Kipling's quote at Wimbledon. If you can look at victory and defeat and see them the same way, you're in good shape. Anyway, that's my answer to that question. I think college tennis, and I think you'll hear a variation of that from anybody who really understands what it is that's valuable about these sports, these individual sports. And college tennis would be high on the list of individual sports that I would want my kids to play for that exact reason. So everything in life is choices, right? Roads you can go down that you don't go down, roads that you do go down. So college for me has been tennis. Tennis has for me been part of my story since I was 10 years old. Yeah. And it continues to be, even though I just acknowledged to you that I'm spending time on pickleball. Tennis is still out there. I've got the Rome tournament on in the background. I'm watching it. And, we do, the Wingfield company does have a very successful tennis product, and it's installed in 700 different locations already. And we're still talking to tennis people. So I still have my toe in the door business-wise with tennis, and I don't think that'll change. The overall summary I would make is, from my perspective, and I do have a pretty good historical perspective on this, the ITA as it exists in 2025 exists first and foremost because David Benjamin took it on with great energy in the 70s and 80s, built it into something that was very significant when he left. Tim and others took on the mantle and took it further. And it is what it is today because of those people and many others, but it's at a very critical juncture because of what's happening in the overall Olympics. I'm going to call them the Olympic sports. So the sports that are played in college that are not money producers for the colleges, that don't generate TV revenue and media revenue and sponsorship revenue, are threatened in a very significant way now by what's happening on the big landscape of football and basketball and NIL, etc. So I don't know. I don't know what the future is, but boy, oh boy, it's in good shape now in every other way.